I think there is some real challenges for HR functions at the moment. I think there are also some massive opportunities. I mean,
Great.
even if you just look at traditionally, I would say that HR would be more viewed as being orientated towards people rather than necessarily task. And the world has definitely moved. There's been a shift towards, an increase in task-based orientation, whether that's the gig economy, whether it's the increasing use of outsourced services. How do you measure people when they're working remotely? You don't want to put do you want to put a screen monitor on them to find out that they're not watching Netflix, or actually you're going to judge them on what they actually deliver? So I think the people versus task element, I find that very interesting as a bit of a conundrum for businesses to address. And it may be that task sits in one area and people sits in another area, and it needs to be looped up under a central function. Or it may be that HR have the opportunity to address task and how that applies to people. But what's your kind of gut reaction on that side of things?
That's a really good question. Sum that up in a 2-minute answer. I mean, it's a real challenge because, if I'm reaching into my own personal experience, I could make a case for both sides and something different as well. So let's try and agree on some things. A virtual world has made task management more harder to manage for a lot of managers, or a lot harder to see for a lot of managers. And it really depends on the sector and the business that you do as to whether you feel you can measure outcomes easily or not. So if you're somebody who's managing a virtual call center, then you can very easily see the metrics that particular operator has managed in any one period. When they were online, when they're offline, just as it was in a real call center. So managing the task of, how much have they done today and what's the outcomes today, easy. In the kind of more knowledge economy type work, where you should be measuring on outputs, but I fear too many managers were still managing on inputs. And so therefore having their resources gaggled around them in a nice office was more comfortable to them. That has been a real challenge for those type of managers that like to see the work effort, the input, and probably traditionally have been less comfortable with just measuring by outputs. I think, we didn't need a pandemic to open that up or not. That was a trend that was happening anyway, which was the world was moving more towards an output desire, but still had some leaders. And I spent a lot of time with managers and leaders, and we still have some managers and leaders who would be honest in a quiet coaching conversation, say, this working from home is great, but I can't wait to get everybody back in the office. And, you have a sneaking feeling there that, really why that is. And that's because they want to see inputs, not just try and measure outputs. I think part of it also is because many organizations just aren't very good at managing expectations about output. So what do I expect from a, HR function, for example, over the next year? It's not something that we're very good at. And there's a reason why a lot of large organizations are pulling back on their performance management systems, because they just weren't fit for purpose, because it was neither measuring the inputs or the outputs very effectively, but was a very cumbersome process for many involved. And then I guess to my final point, to build on the kind of challenge, the pandemic has made engaging with people more important. And whether you manage by task, or whether you manage by output, or whether you manage by engaging your people, the challenge for leadership in a virtual world has, been very significantly enhanced. And I do have a lot of empathy with leaders who are trying to manage people in many different personal circumstances. Yeah. Because you see a nice Zoom screen, and some of us can even afford to put a back screen on it. But actually, behind that, you don't know what's going on in behind the facade of a false screen. If you take Hong Kong, for example, there's many people working from home in very small spaces, sometimes with 3 generations of family in behind the screen. So I think leading in a global pandemic, lockdown, working from home, ideally world has been really challenging, and I think a lot of leaders are coming through that now, but a lot of people are also struggling to kind of work out. You started with this point, what's the new norm? And I think this people versus task thing is just one of the many factors that's out there at the moment.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. Several great points, in fact, but just to hone in on one of them, in some ways, the situation we're in at the moment has made task more important, because what's actually getting done, you can't, we don't want any kind of fluffy, blurry metrics around this. What's actually happening? What's actually getting done? What's it actually doing for the business? And how does that affect this overall objective that we're talking about? But as you rightly point out, people have become more important, and how you look after people has become even more critical. Because like you say, it's brought, I think the pandemic in some ways has leveled the playing field a lot. It's been a great leveler in some ways, because I feel like you have much more person-to-person type interactions. It's less about walking into a big shiny office and all the accoutrements that are associated with a big powerful organization. You're dealing with an individual in their house, on a video call, where there might be something, baby crying in the background, or as at the beginning of our call, I'm not sure if you heard it, there was some sort of mower going along the street. Hopefully it wasn't too audible, but in an office situation, people generally don't bring their personal issues to work. But now people who are managing teams and working on that people basis, it's unavoidable that you're going to have situations where people are like, oh, well, I've got to take the kids to school, or I've got to do X and Y, or it's difficult to do a meeting at a particular time because of their personal circumstances at home. Who's going to get the quiet room today, sort of thing. So I think you make a really, really good point, and I think that's one of the questions that I think is really interesting around this whole thing of the evolving role of HR and people versus task. And that's something that I'm very interested to see how it plays out within organizations that are really transforming at the moment, because both are just so important. And it's almost like both have got more important. But maybe it's that the essence of addressing people and the essence of addressing task have elevated and become more important than this is what the rule book says. In the sense that,
I agree with that. I think to an extent the rule books, it's out the window a wee bit, because basically we have to start again. I think in many organizations we have to say, well, how do we want to operate? It's raising fundamental questions. I mean, we know from a business perspective, for many businesses, and I come from 30 years of banking, there's no doubt that banking and digitalization of banking and customer acceptance of a digital banking world has been accelerated. It's probably gone through 5 years of maturity in 12 months in many, many markets, including Hong Kong, which traditionally is a very paper-driven, like to go into the branch world, very traditional banking model. And they're taking to digitalization here very, very rapidly. So tasks will become more automated. They will become subject to better technology. They are therefore becoming more important in many ways. But over time, that will just be something that happens. My belief, and there's a clue in what I do, but my belief is the people is the bit that you need to focus your energy on going forward. How do you engage people in a digitalized world? How do you engage people in, I see 2020 as a bit of a practice run for what life beyond 2025 might be for us all. And if we look at mental well-being and we look at some of the other aspects that we're learning about now as data is starting to be analyzed, there's a lot of hard work needs to be done in the next 3, 4, 5 years to make sure that we create the workplaces of the future that engage people, look after their health and well-being, and also connect with them emotionally. The rise of emotional intelligence is something that I'm sure will be more and more prevalent over the next 5 years. And one of the reasons why I've started to spend a bit of time on that subject as well in my coaching.